one brief question. The Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind and ask, again, just one brief question. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. And now please join me in welcoming the director of the Dole Institute, Audrey Coleman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. Thank you, Will, for the introduction. As director of the Dole Institute, I am grateful for students like Will and their leadership on the Student Advisory Board for helping us set the tone for our conversations here at the Dole Institute. This afternoon is the official start to our 20th anniversary programming year at the Institute, and we are so fortunate that for that occasion, our fall fellow is none other than Jerry Seib. Jerry Seib is the executive Washington editor of the Wall Street Journal, weekly Capital Journal columnist, now retired, 45-year veteran journalist, KU grad, and Kansas native. In short, the best political journalism has to offer. Midterm election cycles have traditionally been relatively sleepy affairs, and we know that this year that is certainly not the case. Jerry will help us all navigate the changing waters as the campaign season develops with his discussion group, 2022 midterm elections, big stakes, big consequences. 8 sessions over the coming weeks, Wednesdays at 4 o'clock here through the end of September. We'll take a little break and see you again in October. Today's conversation features the nation's top 2 political pollsters, one from each side of the aisle. And as Will said, our conversation will be followed by audience Q&A. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for engaging with us. And now it is my pleasure. Please join me in welcoming our fall fellow, Jerry Seib.
Thank you. You know, it turns out you can come back home again. So here I am, and it's really nice to be here. And I'm really happy to have these 2 fellows beside me. I'm going to introduce you to them in a second. But just to underscore what Audrey said, this is a really important consequential midterm election. Everything is on the table. Control of the House, control of the Senate, the shape of the rest of the Biden term. And it's happening against a backdrop of a very narrowly divided country, and one that's kind of angry about it all. So it's a really important midterm election. I'm glad to be able to chronicle it here, and I'm glad to be able to do it with these 2 guys. I'll give you a brief introduction because they both have done so much in the political world that it's really hard to summarize. But John Anzalone was President Biden's pollster in the 2020 campaign. Somebody won that race, as I recall. Yeah. But
you trying to bait me?
No, you got one too.
Someone won the 2016 race too.
Exactly. But he's worked on other Democratic presidential campaigns, and I think more to the point right now, he, like Tony, is working on a bunch of active current campaigns in this midterm cycle. Tony Fabrizio, I first met, we were just discussing, in 1996 at the Republican convention in San Diego when Tony was the chief pollster for Senator Dole's presidential campaign. He's done a lot of Republican campaigns since then, including President Trump's successful 2016 presidential campaign and then that 2020 presidential campaign. So thank you guys for being with us here. It is not a coincidence that after the 2020 campaign, we at the Wall Street Journal hired these 2 guys to do polling for us because they're very good, they're bipartisan by nature as a team, and they do very rigorous survey work. And they're here today because they're not just pollsters. By the virtue of the polling that they do, they understand the pulse of the country. They can analyze where the country is, and that's really what politics is all about, even more than a horse race. So let me just start with at the 10,000-foot level, if I could. We are in the midst of a campaign that almost feels like 2 campaigns. There's the traditional midterm campaign in which the metrics on the table, kind of a middling presidential rating, the history that says a new president's party loses a lot of seats in the first midterm after he takes office, and a very wary country on the economic front. A lot of economic anxiety due to inflation. That should all be good news for the Republicans. But you have these wild cards that have shown up in the last few months. You have an abortion issue that has worked to the benefit of Democrats. Gas prices are dropping. And you have the kind of continuing Trump drama and an overlay of gun violence. So let me ask each of you, and Tony, I'll start with you. How do those 2 competing sets of forces play out right now, and how do you think they'll play out between now and Election Day?
Well, thank you, Jerry. Thank you for having us. And it's great to be here and to see all of this history about Senator Dole. I think, if we go back a few months, I think everybody would have said that, the prospects for the Republicans were really rosy. And, there was not only talk about us taking a big majority in the House, but we were going to take an easy majority in the Senate. And, everything was just coming up roses for us. I think those projections were probably too rosy at that time. I think that the economic issues that were driving voters to the Republicans also affected Democrats and softened support among key Democrat constituencies, whether they be Hispanics, whether they be African Americans. We even saw it with Asian American Pacific Islander voters. But what happened is, along that path comes the Roe ruling, gun violence, some relief, if you will, when it comes to gas prices. And true to form, my party never misses an opportunity to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory when it can. And what happened is that we saw a reversal not only in a number of key Democrat constituencies going back to Democrats, but we also saw a significant increase in their vote likelihood and vote propensity, which was something that was lacking. They did not have the same energy that we did. And now we're back to where we're basically in a 50-50 proposition and fighting tooth and nail in virtually every race that we can think of across the board.
John?
One of the things is we've all been in politics a long time, collectively. And we all think that we know what's going on, and we don't know what's going on sometimes. Meaning this is that, again, there's these historical trends, and they tend to be really strong historical trends. If you got a Democratic president in the midterm, Republicans do really well. If you have a Republican president in the midterms, the Democrats do really well. It has held steady that way in almost all the modern presidencies. And you were sitting in May 1, and it looked that way. It looked like the Republicans were going to take 35, 40, 45 seats, a little lower than some of the historical ones because redistricting has made those swing districts fewer. But like Tony said, all these things happened. And we've usually, if you get to the summer, things just are steady, and you're going to have that historical trend. I will say a couple things that I think that are really important. On May 1, the Democrats were on the defensive, didn't really have a positive message, was a party who people, even Democrats, felt couldn't get things done because we had over a year trying to get this bill back together in the Biden agenda. And then all these outside forces came along too. The Roe ruling, you had Uvalde, you had Buffalo, and you have January 6th, and you have Trump again kind of inserting themselves. And then what happens? We start getting some legislative victories. We have the bipartisan gun bill. We have CHIPS bringing the supply chain back to America. And then we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which again makes large corporations finally pay their fair share with a minimum tax, lowering prescription drug costs. My point being is we didn't have a positive or negative message in May. And now we not only have a positive message, but we also have these two kind of contrasting messages, one on abortion and social issues, and the other on the fact that Republicans voted against all of this stuff that the American people actually like. And so in traditional years, you have a double-digit advantage on this, what we call the generic ballot. Simple question, are you more likely to vote for a Democrat or Republican? And given the fact that you have terrible right direction, wrong direction, terrible job rating for the economy, you should have double-digit advantages for the Republicans. And as Tony says, they haven't taken advantage of it. But here's what I'll leave you with. May 1, Democrats are on the defensive. May 4th was when the SCOTUS got leaked, and you keep going. You have, again, Buffalo,
the decision on abortion.
Decision on abortion. June 24th, it actually becomes a reality. June 26th, I think the January 6th hearings start, et cetera, et cetera. What is that during? It's during the prime Republican primary season. So what happens is all these Republicans are in these Republican primaries are trying to outdo themselves in the most extreme position on abortion, on guns, defending January 6 rioters and Trump. And they become a little bit out of the mainstream. So you get Oz in Pennsylvania, you get J.D. Vance in Ohio, you get Masters in Arizona. and gives us the opportunity that we never thought we would have. So again, circumstances changed, that's great. The political environment changed a little bit, gas prices. But man, do we love when the Republicans give us an assist by getting nominees who voters feel are outside the mainstream. And now it's a jump ball.
But Tony, as we sit here today, there are 8 weeks left before the election, which in modern politics, it's a lifetime, if not a lifetime and a half.
Yeah.
The imperative for your side, I would think, would be to return the conversation to the economic imperative, the economic issue above all. Is it happening, or can you make it happen?
To show you how long 8 weeks is, John was talking about, passing the Inflation Reduction Act, and they had this big party on the lawn yesterday, while the inflation rate went up, and while the stock market took its biggest hit in 2 years. Well, I was debating whether, but my point being is at the same time that's going on a day where we should be laser focused on the economy and inflation and what's going on with the stock market, Lindsey Graham goes and drops a bill on the 15-week abortion ban, which, by the way, not only brings it back to the front of the conversation, but it is different than a lot of the candidates' positions on abortion. So it makes them defend their position against his bill. So it's, again, never missing an opportunity. Now, look, I get what he's saying about some of our nominees, but even in those races that he's talking about, you don't have to win by 10 points. All you have to do is get one more vote than the other person. And in every one of those states that you're talking about, whether it be Georgia, whether it be Ohio, we didn't mention Nevada at all. I mean, there are still a number of places that are still highly competitive for Republicans and still have the ability to take those seats.
So this is a good time to say, because it's really important what you say, is that by no means is what I'm talking about optimism. What I'm talking about is Democrats are in a competitive space that they never thought they would be, okay? I mean, the fact is that you'll at some point show this chart.
Yeah, we can bring that up now.
Can you bring it up, which is the generic ballot in battleground states. 47% to 47%, is that right?
In the Senate battleground.
In the Senate battleground states. So again, this isn't like me trying to be cheery. This is that we were about to get our butts kicked in May, and now we have the tools in the toolkit to be competitive. Biden's agenda did that, and people don't give him enough credit for that. But let me tell you what, we've done this a long time. In late August of 2014, Democrats were feeling pretty good about being competitive, and the bottom fell out post-Labor Day. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but I think what you're going to see is a straight line. In almost every battleground state that we poll, both of us, and we do national polling for AARP in all of these states.
As well as
Wall Street Journal. It's just a toss-up. It is literally a 50-50 proposition. And so this is April 4th, 2022. This is literally 72-69, the Jayhawks and UNC. It's true. I mean, right? That's what election night's going to be.
I wasn't discouraged.
I knew you were going to bring that. I knew you were going to work a Jayhawks reference into this.
That's what it is. It's going to be that close. Wow. And we don't know we don't know whether the Democrats are the Jayhawks or the Republicans are the Jayhawks.
There is. I know what they are. But the one thing that is very true is that, yes, if you think about this as a tug of war, right? And you got that red, stringer that hangs. Well, for months, our team was just pulling it to the other side. It was on the other side of the box, on the side of the midway line. And what's happened now is it's gone back to center. And both sides are struggling. The thing that we don't know, and we got a glimpse of it yesterday, is what happens with the economy. And what happens with the additional. What we saw, even in the Wall Street Journal poll, while the base measures of economic well-being didn't change, in fact, they got slightly worse, what happened is the focus went away from that and went to issues like abortion and gun violence. And when that happened, that changed the dynamics, and it motivated and energized voters that weren't before and brought voters home that weren't there before. In fact, in the Wall Street Journal survey, one of the things that's interesting is almost exclusively all the movement that was made in the generic ballot was made in states that Biden won in 2020. Trump states stayed exactly the same. Did not
But
change a point.
What's important, which was a narrative in D.C., was that when Joe Biden's numbers started moving up, which historically is the biggest movement in modern presidency from the summer to a midterm election if they hold.
Hope you're taking credit for that.
And second, now I forgot what I was going to say.
It works all the time.
Here's the thing: is the narrative in D.C. was, well, Democrats are just coming home on the generic ballot. No, independents moved. Independents were some of the biggest movers. And the fact is that whether it's when we took the House back in 18 and 6, or you guys took the House back in 2010 and kept it in 14, it's all about where independents move. And there's this myth that there's no swing voter, there's no persuadable. There is. Yeah. There really is. And the fact is that, Democrats win them in 2018, and Republicans won them in 2010, and they go back and forth. And 14 too, but
and right now, what you have, what's very interesting with independents, is you have independent men who are focused on economic issues. They're voting for the Republican by 10 points.
And
independent women
and younger,
right? Yeah. And independent women who are focused more on abortion than economics by a 10-point, by a double-digit margin, and they're voting for the Democrats, and they're part of the larger group that flipped from our previous survey to this survey.
But let me ask you both to quantify this. Like, how many independent voters are there really in the electorate today? I mean, what size of the universe?
True independents?
Yeah, true independents.
Yeah, well,
I know.
So
you go and then
what
I'll
happened?
jump.
Yeah, thank you. So
not that he was going to let me go first, but I was.
I was going to let you make another Jayhawk reference. So I think in registration states, okay, Kansas is a registration state. So you know how many independents there are, or how many people register as independents. But in a state like
we call them non-party.
Nonpartisan. But in states like Alabama or in states like Illinois, there is no party registration, or Missouri, there is no party registration. So you get a larger number of people in surveys that will call themselves politically independent or nonpartisan, politically independent. And then what happens is we take those people and we push them. And we say, okay, you say you're an independent, but do you lean more towards the Republican or the Democrat Party? And when you push them, so if you get a third, let's say they're independents, when you push them, you usually wind up with about 15% that are pure independent, that don't lean to one party or the other. Depends by state.
Right.
But what's happened is that the people who lean one way or the other, it used to be that they were soft in their support for the party they lean to. Now, more and more, we find that they behave almost like the people who call themselves Democrats or the people who call themselves Republicans.
Right. So I would add a couple things that I think are important about independents, is that the universe of independents in our polls, are you more likely, do you consider yourself a Democrat, a Republican, or independent? The fact is that universe actually changes. And think about this for a second. Right now, we take a look at those independents, and there is a universe of disgruntled Republicans, you can call them non-Trumpers, who don't want anything to do with Trump. So what do they identify in our polls as independents. It makes that universe what? More conservative. Right. So that universe of independents right now acts a little bit more Republican than it does
But are
Democrat.
they still functionally Republicans?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, I have states right now where literally the Democratic candidate is getting, 5 to 7% of self-identified Republicans. That's pretty high. And, I can tell you, it's because the candidate is a Trump candidate, and therefore, that's good for Democrats. And this has happened with Democrats too, don't get me wrong. I mean, it goes. But my point is that universe of independents changes. The second thing is new registration is becoming much more independent. And young people, like 30 and under, are registering non-party or independents. They don't want any pox on both houses.
Tony knows that's true in this state, big time right now. But I'm sorry.
One of the things that one of the ways that we do our surveys is we always try to talk to the exact voter. So in a state like Kansas, when we call you on the phone, we know who you are. Yes, we know how you are.
That's unsettling.
I know that is unsettling.
You should find a better way to say that.
I didn't mean to say it that way, but it is unsettling. But we know who the person is. We know what they're registered as. Now, it used to be that, if you said you were a registered Republican, 90% of the time or plus, you'd say you're a registered Republican. What we're noticing this year is that people who say they're Democrats or people who say they're independents, particularly earlier in the year, we were noticing a higher percentage of them misidentifying themselves. So you had Democrats calling themselves independents, or some of them even calling themselves Republicans. You know what I'm saying? And so when you get that disparity, it's because those people were most likely to be among the people who were most dissatisfied with Biden early on. Now, that's changing as we go forward.
Well,
and his numbers
because of
improve.
Roe. I mean,
Yeah,
Roe
yeah,
really did
yeah,
change
yeah.
things. Again, there's, people who are pissed off about it, and they're not going to vote Republican. Yeah. That's good for us. I actually think that one of the things post-election that will be really interesting, and I suggest you keep an eye on this on election night, I think that the universe of libertarian, American taxpayers, independents, in Nevada, none of the above is actually on the ballot. Yeah. That's true. My point being is that there's disgruntled voters out there, mostly disgruntled Republican, Trump, or because of Roe, that are going to be voting third party. They don't want to vote Democrat. But guess what? Every Republican who votes third party is like a vote for a Democrat. I mean, that's good for us. So I think that that's one dynamic that we should really watch out. We see it in our polls. We always know that the polling for the third party is higher than the actual vote. And I think that the delta between that this time may be smaller. And I think it's a dynamic that's going to be really interesting post-election to analyze.
So, Tony, let me ask you to pick up on that and the abortion point in particular, because there was a time, I think, in politics where I would have said pro-life forces were more motivated by an abortion debate to vote than the other side, the pro-choice. That's clearly not proven to be the case here.
They won.
Why is that? Why are they more motivated now? A, and B, does that fade as we get closer to the election?
They're not more motivated.
You
mean pro-life?
No, pro-choice.
Right, pro-choice.
Oh, because I mean, it's they had a right taken away from them.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it is, one of the things, and John and I, we've talked about this, and that is there is a difference between the hypothetical and the reality. And, before the ruling came down, a candidate's position on abortion was important, but it didn't matter as much because nothing was going to change, right? Okay, that's one of the things. But now, in a state like Michigan, where I know John's doing the governor's race, there is literally a ballot measure that is going to decide whether or not abortion is illegal in that state. Because there was a trigger law that went into effect.
That no one knew about.
Right.
I think this
from
is really
1913.
Important. Yeah, 31.
I mean, so 1930, sorry. I was trying to help you. But, I mean, so now you've got it on the ballot. It's impossible to extract that campaign, abortion out of that campaign. It's literally on the ballot. And by the way, it's not the only state that it's going to be on the ballot.
And you saw here in Kansas how important that issue is and was. And I think what Tony has said in the past is that in some ways, the abortion ban with SCOTUS was like a defibrillator for Democrats and certain voters. And what we found, when I do Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Whitmer, what we found in our research in Michigan is that, most women thought, well, a year from now, abortions will still be available and access, et cetera, not realizing that there was this constitutional line from 1931 that was going to ban abortions in Michigan. That puts people on edge. That puts people in action. And so Tony talked earlier about enthusiasm. In May, enthusiasm for Republicans were here. Enthusiasm for Democrats were here. Enthusiasm for African Americans and Latinos were down here. Okay? And it was for a lot of things. Again, I mean, our base voters can get disappointed in our own party because we can't get things done. And guess what? Who has the major financial impact on inflation? Lower income people, African Americans, Latinos, and young people just starting out. There was a lot of reason for that disappointment or, whatever you want to call it. And everything is this now. That's where enthusiasm is with Democrats and Republicans. And it's that combination of things like Roe, which put people into action, and we've gotten a lot of things done for American working families and seniors that now says, oh, okay, they're on our side. And so it's just a new ball game. Do we have a competitive edge? No. Are we competitive? Yes. And that's what's going to happen. Now, what will the media do? They already think that now they've played it out to where if we don't have what they consider enough victories, we'll have somehow messed up the election, even though this should be an election where Republicans take 30 seats in the House.
Well, because the expectations have swung.
They've swung.
They've swung.
Even though it's
right.
irrational, quite frankly.
And it is, expectations are rational, and one of the things that is always true and will always be true is the people in Washington, what they think invariably has very little to do with the average voter is thinking.
All right, he lives in Florida and he lives in Alabama.
Yeah, we do
so
not
they're
live in the
swamp
Beltway.
with me.
Thankfully, we do not live in the
right.
Beltway.
If you want to be a Democrat, live in a place like Red, Alabama. If you want to be a Republican, live in Broward County, Democrat.
Broward County, Florida,
It works
right?
out
like
really well
the
for
most
us.
liberal
Yeah,
county
yeah,
in Florida.
yeah.
But let me ask you about the abortion effect in a different way. You've both talked about what it did for changing the issue matrix and affecting sort of incentive, motivation to vote. Has it actually changed the electorate by getting new registrants on?
Yes.
And you're probably seeing that.
Well,
in
I mean,
Michigan,
you've seen
right?
the analysis. You saw the analysis
This is
in
Target Smart.
Kansas and Target Smart, and you've seen it in places like Pennsylvania. New registrants are disproportionately women in registering Democrat. I mean, it has literally motivated people to come out. Now, this causes us a problem because one of the things that has happened since the ascent of Trump in 16, 18, and 20, and now probably 22, is that no one knows who's coming out. Yeah. And we're surprised every time. Oh, you can't get any more Trump voters. Oh, guess what? Yeah, you can. All right. And now we know that there's this big registration push, and that's disproportionately women who are pissed off. This is the year of the pissed off woman. We always have to have a moniker. Oh, this is the year of the soccer mom, or this is the year of whatever. This may be the year of the pissed off woman, and rightfully so. And the fact is that we won't know because we just, not as pollsters, but just as political people as well, we haven't been good at figuring out who's coming out because
One of the things I will say is that I think it's going to be a patchwork. And why I think it's going to be a patchwork is I think that there are states that abortion is settled law in. So I think a state like Pennsylvania, where it's on the books, it is settled law. In the Senate race, I think it'll have less impact than, now the governor's race, it may have some impact because the governor can actually change something. But in a state like Nevada, it may have less of an impact, But in states where it is actively on the ballot or there is actively measures being put forth by the governor or the legislature to change the law or make it more restrictive, I think it has a better chance because one of the things we know is that when you pit inflation and economic issues against abortion and gun violence, generally a majority pick the inflation and the economic concerns over that, depending on the state. The closer it is, the better the Democrat does. The wider the margin, the better the Republican does. So that's what you have to look at each of these states.
So here's why I think the abortion issue is different this time. One is, again, it was leaked and overturned during Republican primaries. So what do you have? You have Tudor Dixon, who is the nominee in Michigan for governor. And she had to go be as extreme as she could be because she was in a 9-way Republican primary when all this happened, and she had to be pure. So here she's on TV in a video, her words, with a conservative radio guy saying, and so you're against abortion even in the case of rape and incest? Yes. In the life of the mother? Yes. And he's actually like, this is a conservative guy. And she's like, okay, an uncle rapes a 14-year-old girl, and she's like, perfect example. So she is so extreme that it is going to be a problem for her. And my point is that not only is that a signal to voters that, wow, that's way out there. That's different than saying, I'm pro-life, it's my religion, whatever it is. That used to be I'm pro-life. Right? No, she's against abortion in the case of rape, incest, in the life of the mother, and it's her saying it. It is in the TV ad. But here's my bigger point. That is a signal to voters for what? If she's that extreme on that issue, she's that extreme on a bunch of other issues. And so that's the problem that Republicans have right now with all of these nominees who it's just not I'm pro-life, which maybe a person can respect at some level. They are so extreme in the cases.
Yeah. Let me talk about the other X factor, which is the Trump factor and Trump voters. So, Tony, in the primary season, was it a clear advantage for a Republican candidate to be pro-Trump and to be a supporter of the Stop the Steal movement, A, and B, is it clear that that's an advantage in the general because it's a motivator of Trump base voters, or is it a disadvantage because you've got to speak to an audience that doesn't buy into all that?
Well, I think you're conflating two things that don't necessarily go together. One is that whether or not you agree that the 2020 election was stolen wasn't necessarily the driving force for the primary voters themselves. But it was something that obviously was a litmus test for the former president.
Yeah.
And so if, obviously he was more supportive of candidates who agreed with him on the 2020 election than not. So, that led to potential to get his endorsement. And there was a lot of people that tried to get his endorsement. I mean, it was never ending, the parade of people. In fact, up until just the New Hampshire primary last night. Up until last night, Morse was begging for his endorsement up until the last minute.
The candidate who did not get it in New Hampshire.
He did not get it, and he lost by a couple of thousand votes. Obviously, Trump would have made a difference there. I do think, however, that it was clear that more often than not, his candidates won those primaries. Now, as to their position on abortion, there was no litmus test on his part on what their position on abortion was. These are things they went out and took upon themselves, never expecting that they were going to throw Roe out, because they're going for their state right to life endorsement for the organization. And what happens is, like everything else, there's a race to see how far you can get that endorsement, never imagining that this is going to come back.
But in the past, it was always with Republican candidates. It was always, I'm pro-life, but I believe in abortion in cases of the rape, incest, and life of mother. And it's just gone crazy.
Because they've gone further to the right.
But at the end of the day, election's over, and if the Republicans lose the Senate, which I think they will.
That sounds like being optimistic to me.
Let me pause you right there just to remind people the Senate is, as we speak, 50-50 between the two parties. Five.
But you're not going to get it election night. You're going to get it on December 6th in Georgia, because that potentially goes to a runoff. And in Georgia, there's a state law that says you have to get 50 plus 1.
Right.
So it may be deja vu all over again that you're sitting there waiting for Georgia. That's a real possibility.
Yeah.
A real possibility. But once again, I lost my train of thought because you said,
what
was I saying? Where was I going?
You were going to use, all I heard you say was that you guys are winning the majority.
I got it back. It's because if they lose the majority, or we keep the majority, it's going to be because of Trump nominees. It's because they nominated Ted Budd in North Carolina instead of Pat McCrory, and maybe we steal that seat. It's going to be because they nominated Oz, whose unfavorable rating is 60% in Pennsylvania. It's because of, Masters, he did Dole.
Masters didn't. That was great.
In Arizona.
So he did Masters is a Trump. Again, Kelly. The reality is that would be a story.
But what I'm getting at is the classic question that.
But my question, flip side of that is.
I didn't ask you a question.
No, but I'm asking you a question. Flip side of that is, my learned friend, if in fact Herschel Walker wins,
Herschel was another one.
Okay, Herschel wins in Georgia. Bud wins in North Carolina.
He'll get the victory.
Does he get the victory?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, just want to make sure.
How can you not do an analysis right now if you're a reporter?
I agree with you.
And say that Trump won the primary. That it is a Trump Republican primary.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying.
Because Herschel, I didn't even think of Herschel, New Hampshire, Arizona. I mean, at the end of the day, pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
Main ones.
I was trying to get at a broader question, and it's a classic question left over from 2020, which is Donald Trump a better motivator of Republican voters or Democratic voters?
But here's the thing is,
No.
I think
Both.
I think
Okay.
we are done believing in any way. Again, the Trump voter is always motivated. That they don't get unmotivated. They're always motivated. Now we are
always
motivated.
angry.
We are motivated, and because of registration, what's going to be interesting is, are we neutralizing something that we haven't been able to do? Like in 2018, women, suburban women were ticked off. They didn't like Trump, and they came out in droves, right? But that was really more about, again, independence, right? Moving that way. Independent women, suburban women, et cetera, flipping. This is different. This is actually a model. Like, this is like, will there be new people coming out? Because in a midterm, it's older, it's whiter, it's more Republican, it's more conservative. So this is about, will the midterm electorate actually change?
Except in 2018, where it was opposite of those things. But one of the things we noticed in 2018, we did, I don't know how many districts for CLF, which is the main Republican super PAC. We may have 40 districts or so. And, again, I said, again, not to freak you all out, but we know who we're talking to on the phone because we try to talk to specific voters, right? And so we know what their vote history is. And so we were finding in each one of these surveys that between, anywhere between 15 and 25% of the people that were screening into the surveys were non-midterm voters. And there was a significant gap between the regular midterm voters and what they were saying they were going to vote generically, and those that were the new voters. And so you're looking at it and you're saying to yourself, well, you see a district after district after district, and consistently, you know that if turnout's going up, we got a problem.
We got a problem.
We got a real problem.
Real problem.
And guess what? Turnout went up. And the same thing occurred in 20. Reverse.
Yes.
Because I'll never forget somebody, I will not say who, said to the former president, if you get 75 or 76 million votes, you got it in the bag. Guess not.
That's where all the trouble started, there.
It did not. Nobody.
We got the end the chaos vote. That was the surge.
You're telling me. Huh?
All right, so let me ask about a couple of groups of voters that the three of us have talked about a lot in recent months. Hispanic, Latino voters, and black voters. Mm-hmm. So I'll start with you, John, because we saw some flip back to the Democrats amongst those voters in our survey at the end of the summer. But if you take a step back and look over time, your party's lost ground among those two groups, which everybody assumed were kind of in the bag for Democrats no matter what. What's happened?
Well, listen, I think that, again, I look at Latino voters very much like I look at my parents, quite frankly, Italian Americans, who, the next generation, they just wanted to be Americans. And so I think we forget that, right? In terms of, for example, John Salazar, who I used to poll for, who was in the Four Corners of Colorado. His family had been there for hundreds of years. Yeah. That's much different Latino voter than a brand new Latino voter from Colombia or Haiti or Mexico, et cetera, right? And so it's not a monolithic group. It's not, Latino voters are like, I'm Mexican American, I'm Colombian American, I'm Haitian American, et cetera, right? And the fact is that there's a big universe of Latinos, 35, 40%, who are going to be very persuadable. You have to treat Latinos like persuadable voters. And I would say the same thing with African Americans in the sense that, there's a universe, which is our new paradigm, which, Trump was attracted to younger African American men. We know that. And so it's our job to give them a good reason that we're the better party for their needs.
At one time in 20, it was right before we closed down the country, in March for COVID. I had a series of polls and I was going through it with him. And in every one of our target states, in one of our toss-up states, he was getting 20% or slightly higher of the African-American vote, which at that point, heretofore had been unheard of. And it was all based on the economics. It was all based on economics. And that all obviously evaporated.
Not completely with
Latinos. But with African Americans it did. And largely because of the concern about COVID and so on and so forth. But I mean, it is one of the things we see as a phenomenon is a growing number of African Americans registering as independents, not as Democrats.
Men, women, both.
Both. Both. And the same thing with Hispanics. More of them are registering as independents. And the economic messages certainly do resonate with that.
Well, I can tell you what else resonates. You're not going to like this, so saddle up. Is that the Republicans do, I hate to say a tremendous job, but what they is disinformation. There's not a group that is targeted more by disinformation, which I think is a scourge in American politics, than to African Americans and Latinos. We saw it in 2020. It's all personal stuff. It's all, it's not policy. It's not about tax policy. It's about pedophilia. It's about just crazy stuff. And disinformation is a big part of American politics. You clearly know that from the big lie and all that type of stuff. But you very seldom think about it in terms of what is being targeted to very specific groups, including white rural America. But it's very, very intense with African Americans and Latinos.
But just quick follow-up, should we stop thinking about those, we mean observers and participants in the political class, stop thinking about working class Hispanic voters as working class Hispanic voters and start thinking of them more as just working class voters?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it depends, a lot of it depends on how long they've been here, too.
Yeah.
How long they've been here, the language they speak in their house
right.
regularly. I mean, there is
And
a
where
lot
they
of...
live.
Yeah,
And just
and
where
by
they
the way, the
live.
type of Hispanic.
Well,
I mean,
you live in
ethnic,
Florida,
yes,
it's different.
the ethnic base. I mean,
Yeah.
it's changed. Mexicans are
Right.
different than Cubans, are different than Puerto Ricans.
Well, but geographically,
And
I always did
Dominicans.
Luis Gutierrez, who was the first Hispanic congressman from Chicago. Well, if you're in Chicago and you're Latino, you're going to have more of a propensity to be Democrat than if you're a Latino in southern Texas. You see what I'm saying? Geographically, culturally, et cetera. And we just have to stop thinking of Latinos as a monolithic group,
Yeah, I know.
because they are not a monolithic group.
So I'm going to ask one more question, then open it up for you all to jump in and take part. But I want you to be predictive, not of outcomes, because I quit predicting outcomes in 2016.
Well, he predicted already. Go ahead.
That's true. But of what we're going to hear in coming weeks before November 8th. And there will be millions and millions of dollars spent on ads with
Billions.
Okay, billions. Better yet for ad makers and TV stations.
They make the most money.
It turns out. What will we be hearing most in campaign messaging on your side and on your side in the closing weeks?
Well, on the positive side, we actually have a positive message. This is actually one of the things I think it was a big mistake by the Republicans was not having an agenda, right? A kind of an economic agenda. We have something to say, right? We helped bring the supply chain back to America. We lowered drug prices. We're making big corporations pay their fair share. We put together, energy independence bill. We have something positive to say. So I think that's important. And there's going to be two buckets of contrast. One is the extreme positions of the opponents on abortion. But again, the other big thing is all the Republicans voted against lowering drug prices for seniors, making big corporations pay their fair share, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we have the tools in the toolkit to do all of those, and that's what we're going to be talking about. I know what they're going to be talking about.
Well, let's find
What are we
out.
going to be talking about? That's all well and good. The only way that all those positive things help you is if, A, the economy actually starts to improve, and B, if voters actually feel they're getting the benefits of them.
No.
So talking to them about saving on their prescription drug prices, if they aren't saving on their prescription drug prices, how many of you here believe in politicians' promises? I mean, raise your hand, okay? I mean, that's number one. Number two is that we saw a glimpse of this the other day. The economy still, all of the underlying measures still portend people's dissatisfaction with the economy. And if we get back to being focused on the economy, that will be a boon to Republicans, because one of the things we don't talk about is even with the bounce back because of the Roe ruling, Republicans still had a sizable advantage on which party's best able to handle inflation. And so that benefits us going into the voting
And we
booth.
had advantages on prescription drugs. We had advantages on making the wealthy and the big
If that's the
corporations
most
pay their fair
important
share.
thing, if that's the
And
most
we had
important thing
advantage
they're
on
voting
abortion
on.
rights.
If that's the most important thing they're voting on. If it's not, and the other thing is, all of this spending, here is the soft underbelly here. Before this all occurred, voters were willing to believe that the government spending was actually fueling inflation. All of this additional spending, if it gets back to that, and now you're seeing ads come out where you find out that tucked into the bill was money for a ski resort, where money for opera singers, money for I called it the Midnight Basketball Campaign of 1994, where Republicans won because of all the reckless spending in these bills. That's the other thing. And lastly is, while yes, our guys have gotten themselves in a noose on abortion in a number of these states, their candidates have gotten themselves in the noose on defunding the police and crime.
Not
oh,
one.
absolutely.
There's not a Democrat out there.
Mandela Barnes.
There's not a candidate
Raphael
out there.
Warnock. Absolutely.
Oh my God.
Absolutely.
See, this is the problem.
Absolutely.
Like, they don't have a message.
What are you talking about? Mandela Barnes talked about defunding police 7 times. He did.
Questions?
He did.
I think Tony just sent a message out to the Dole Institute audience, but to Republican candidates across the country.
Yeah,
with
right,
that answer.
right.
So I'll open it up to questions. First of all, I'll remind you that a question is in fact a question. It actually has a question mark at the end, and it shouldn't be as long as any of the answers that you're expecting from the question. So raise your hands. There's a microphone up front, and then there's a microphone in the back. And and by the way, if people, you'll have to remind me, if people who are watching on YouTube want to send in a question, they send it to Dole Dole questions, one word, at ku.edu, and you can send in a question from afar. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
So this has a little bit to do with the description of the right wing as swinging further right during this year's primaries. I know that we talked a lot about the Michigan state in particular, which is interesting because the candidate that came out of that primary was not the one that anybody would have expected at the start because, again, those 5 got disqualified. Another one got arrested by the FBI. Yeah,
He was still on the ballot, though.
Yes, but it was quite the tumultuous campaign. And then you also have things like the Democrats supporting the farther right.
I'm going to interrupt you there very briefly, not to make you stop, but just to make you stand up, which I should have.
Yeah.
So
You made him
So
stop.
okay.
So the other thing was the Democrats supporting like some of the further right candidates, such as Chris Kobach in our state, got a lot of money from the Democrats to fund his campaign. Do you think that that sort of thing, like these little weird circumstances, might have created like a stand-up effect where it looked like everybody was going right, when really, if this had all played out like it normally would have, the Republicans might have stayed closer to center?
Okay,
You can both have a crack
I think
at
I
that.
know it. So this happens on both sides, where Democrats will actually spend money to try to get the worst Republican nominee. It didn't work in Michigan, by the way. That, the fact is they were hitting the independent campaign. It has nothing to do with the Whitmer campaign. So you still got Tudor Dixon. And sometimes it works. I mean, I guess the most famous one is Harry Reid got Sharon Ingle, right? And that was the best case
Nevada.
in 2010, and that couldn't have been better, or et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it's just gamemanship. It's just Machiavellian politics.
Just happened in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
You had McConnell funneling money to support Morse, millions, and you had Schumer funneling money to basically bolster up Bolduc. So
just to translate, the Democrats wanted the more Trumpian candidate to win. They spent
Yes.
money for that candidate,
Yes.
and he won.
yes, and he won.
And we'll see if that
got a
works or
victory.
not.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. We've got one right here in the front.
You
Okay,
have to,
that one first.
stand up, otherwise
this one.
Jerry will interrupt you.
I will, that's true.
All right, so as someone who watches a lot of religious polls and whatnot, Pew just came out with their poll today saying that by 2070, they're considering that the Christian population in this country will be down in the 30%. And so as someone who is in a religious community that is not Christian and who looks at laws like passing in Texas of we have to have "In God We Trust" in our public schools, looking at the abortion debate, mostly not just because of a pissed off woman, but as a pissed off non-Christian. I'm curious how you see those playing into these polls. Do you guys look at that factor? Because I know for one, my religious community is scared as shit.
Yeah, I mean, we look at religiosity and we look at, the frequency that people go to church, which is often the way. We often also ask, I don't like the question because I don't think it gets to it, whether someone's evangelical, Pentecostal, or born again, because again, that's kind of a base for Trump. So we look at that by a demographic. Clearly, if you're non-religious or non-affiliated or atheist, your vote for a Democrat is much higher. If you're evangelical, Pentecostal, or born again, the numbers are huge for Republicans. The one thing I should have said about the Latino vote is that the biggest increase in evangelical is within the Latino community. They're going from Catholicism to a much more conservative evangelical. These white denominations very welcoming to the Latino communities in those evangelical churches, and that's another reason you're seeing a bigger portion of Latinos voting
Move the other
Republican.
way,
Religiosity is very much a factor in Republican primaries. How often you attend church, whether you're white, born again Christian, evangelical Christian. In fact, I would venture to say, off the top of my head, if I recall correctly, and they are definitely part of the Republican base at every level. And I would venture to say that there wasn't a lick of difference between the vote Trump got out of that group in 16 than he got in 20. So they are a very stable group.
Yeah.
Now, your question is, do we think that we'll see a diminution of that type of religiosity as we go forward, like Pew is predicting? Hard to say. We don't look at it from that. We don't look at it from that standpoint. We look at it, because there are so many stereotypes of religion. Like one of the things we found in the Wall Street Journal poll, not to go back to abortion again, is people are led to believe that Catholics are, homogeneous in their attitudes about abortion. They're not. In fact, Catholics in many respects are more liberal on certain aspects of abortion than Protestants are, because you have born-again evangelicals in that set of Protestants. So we look at it from the standpoint of how it's going to affect their vote, not necessarily what's going to happen in another 20 or 30 years if this group is going to be greater than that group or not. But
well, again, we're very careful about that demographics is destiny. Have you ever heard of that? Oh, the Democrats they're going to be great because African Americans, Latinos, etc. It's the same thing with non-religious people. That number's going up. But I'm done with demographics is destiny. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact is it doesn't work. I mean,
So you'll have some non-religious people who are more Republican.
Think about it. Think about it. As we've seen a complete flip. As the number of people who became college educated grew, that was a reliably Republican voting group for years. Now it's flipped to where the more reliably voting group is non-college educated voters, and it's flipped the other way. So it changed, so it no longer holds water.
And also, the pandemic really changed church attendance.
Yeah.
And so it hasn't recovered.
Yeah.
No. But I tell you, Democrats are killing it with Episcopalians. That's we're doing great with it. That's our group, man.
You guys are killing us with it.
Yeah.
Micro-targeting. I think right here, and then we'll go over there.
All right, this is like a broader question about polls. I know we kind of talked about it earlier with the students, but polls aren't always accurate. Sometimes that's due to methodology, but do you feel that the person conducting the poll or the company can affect the voters' responses?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, our job, there are two types of polls. There are polls that are done, well, there's more different types, but you have the media poll, which is done to generate headlines, and then you have the polls that we do for our clients that are done to actually determine strategy, like we talked about, and messaging and targeting and resource allocation and so on and so forth. Our job in those surveys, we will at times be more biased in terms of our wording on certain things, particularly messaging, to get to where we want to figure out things. But on the media polls or the public polls, there shouldn't be, but there are, and there are different ways you can bias. One, you could do it just plainly by wording. The other is you could do it by question order. So there are certain things you should never ask before you ask other things in a survey. But there are pollsters that will do that, And you don't know it because you don't see the order of the questions so the Wall Street Journal survey, they published the whole thing. They put the entire thing so everybody could see from the first question to the last question. And if somebody's got a gripe that we somehow bias the questions we don't. That's why we put it out there for everybody to see. So yes, you can.
And the reality is, polling is hard. We know that. To get it right is even harder. And guess what? It's really expensive. And the fact is, and it's not for amateurs. I mean, I don't say that in arrogance. I'm just telling you, the fact is that you have to have a commitment to do it the right way, and it's expensive, and most media companies won't do that. The Wall Street Journal happens to be committed to doing it the right way, and it's expensive, thank you. But the fact is that's the only way to do it, and you just see so many crappy polls out there. And so the other thing is, I love the averages of polls, 538, RCP, all of that, but it's still an average of mostly crappy polls.
Right. Crap in, crap
And so,
out.
I mean,
Crap in,
so
crap out.
there's a problem out there, and there's no polling police. And right now, any university with a professor and some students can do a poll, and that's a problem.
Right. Well, I also think that, even though we're on opposite sides of the aisle, and there are a number of his Democrat colleagues that I work with, and he works with a number of my Republican colleagues. If one of us
You're
were
my
to
favorite.
Oh, you're my favorite.
Oh, okay.
Don't tell Joel Benson.
Yeah.
But don't tell him when he's here. Tell him I said he's my favorite.
Okay.
But if somebody said, oh, I saw an Anzalone poll and it said this, or somebody said I saw a Benson poll and said this or something, that would carry way more weight with me in knowing that was a reliable, well done, thought out poll, and I think the same would be true for a number of our
Well, we know
colleagues.
in our industry who are, high standards and
Right.
substandards.
These pollsters that are out there are the bane of my and John's
The
existence.
public polls are the bane of our
the
Well, and I will just add my own editorial commentary on this as somebody who's involved in polling from the media side, which is I wish everybody in my profession would spend a lot less time obsessing about the horse race numbers
Yes.
and
Right.
look at polls that tell you something much more valuable, which is where's the country, what's the psyche, what are people worried about, regardless of whether it's 2 ticks up or 2 ticks down on the horse race number. But that's probably a
And they
futile
talk about
wish.
1-point movement like it's statistically
Exactly.
significant,
Yeah.
and it's not.
Yeah.
I know.
You
And
all
but-
take statistics, you study it, it's like, that means nothing.
Yeah, but everybody has become convinced that it's meaningful.
Yeah.
And that's the fault of people in my business, I would say. So we'll go there, and then over that direction next.
There are now 3 black senators, Warnock in Georgia, Scott in South Carolina, and Booker in New Jersey.
Yep.
Is it possible that number will double after this election if Demings in Florida, Beasley in North Carolina, and Barnes in Wisconsin win?
The answer is yes. I mean, all of those are, quite frankly, toss-up races. And so it could absolutely be the case. I would also add, and Tony will know this a little bit more than I do, the number of African-American Republican candidates
Keeps
in
on
primaries is just skyrocketing.
Keeps on growing.
And so, again, it's not going to be at parity with the Democratic Party. But I think it's a good thing for America.
Yes. The number
you
of
know,
Hispanic and African-American candidates on the Republican side has exploded in the last decade. Exploded.
And I think the other thing is that you're seeing, Secretary of State candidates. I mean, all down the line, Democrats and Republicans nominees, and I think that becomes very important as well.
Right there.
Yeah, I'm a former registered.
Can you stand up, please?
Oh, sure. I'm a former registered Republican, but now when I think of the Republican Party, I think white rage, I think misinformation and bad candidates. I guess my question is the traditional, respectful Republican Party gone?
Well, we're sitting here in the Bob Dole Institute. First of all, it's an honor. I didn't say thank you. I remember sitting with George McGovern about a month and a half before he passed away. I had dinner with him, and he would talk about how Bob Dole and him would come together on really big issues in America. And if those two came together and I'm kind of getting chills, sponsored a bill, it was going to pass with like 70 or 80 votes in the Senate, Democrat and Republicans. And so, again, I mean, we can pick Democrats who you don't like and who are caustic, and you can pick Republicans. But if you had someone like Bob Dole and even George McGovern, both veterans, et cetera, and you can pick a lot of them, right now around. There's just fewer and fewer. But hopefully, at some point, we get back to that.
Look, the politics, elections have consequences, and voters have decisions that they make in elections. And it is unfortunate, but the fact of the matter is that our politics has become very polarized. And it's part of the reason why our politics has become polarized is because of the means and the ways that voters get information. We have a much more knowledgeable base of voters, not a more educated base of voters. There is a difference between knowledgeable and educated. And so what happens is, and I don't mean to pick on big tech, but I will, what happens is when you go online and you look up something, you get an article, okay? You read that article. Now, maybe the first time you read the article, it's in Breitbart, okay? And you don't care who Breitbart is, you're just reading the article. Well, guess what? There's an algorithm somewhere that says, oh, he read Breitbart. So now I'm going to feed him more things like Breitbart, Blaze, pick the rest of them, Newsmax, whatever it may be. And so now your diet is nothing but that stuff. And you no longer know what's real and what's not. The other night I was having a conversation with somebody and they said, oh, it says here that Trump said in his Truth Social, he posted something that said he was secretly knighted by the Queen. So now, I mean, is it possible he said that?
Sure, right.
But I said, well, what was the source on it? Well, it took like 7 levels to find out that somebody just posted it as a hoax, and it made it all around the web, and it became fact. And that's part of the problem. And people opinion shop nowadays. They opinion shop. And when you opinion shop, you're not getting any diversity of opinion. You're getting the same opinion you have over and over and over again, just from a different point, a different angle.
But here's one, can I just add to this, is that here's the irony in American politics, and it's this myth and narrative that you hear from DC. You always hear about liberals, AOC, and all that. The reality is that we win the House and the Senate with moderates. Like right now, if we get close in the House and we keep the Senate, it will all the frontline Democrats are moderates, and most of the nominees, they are. We won the House in 2006. These don't exist anymore with a lot of Southern Democrats.
Yeah.
And right. The fact is all of our frontline Democrats are moderates. I mean, they are. I don't know why you're looking that way. We win the presidents with moderates. Now, you may eventually say that they're liberals. And you're right now, your party, I'm not saying that this is going to switch. The fact is there's no moderates left in the Republican Party. They can't win a Republican primary.
But
that is true.
Are the people who are financing your candidates, are the sources of money moderate or to the left?
I don't know the answer. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that, we don't have to ask the ideology of donors, right? I think that they have
except that ACT
No,
Blue.
they have their billionaires. And we have our billionaires.
Now,
No. I mean, that's right. They have the Kochs and we have the Soros, et cetera, et cetera. They got more of them than we do. But I really don't, honestly, I'm being sincere, I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah. I think our small donors are just moderates and normal
That's my
normal
question,
people.
really, since online small donor fundraising is the biggest change.
And the biggest change is that we're doing better. It used to be their domain, and now it's become our domain.
Yeah, the only game on our side, the only game in town on our side is Trump.
In terms of
Trump,
fundraising, you mean?
In terms of low dollar online fundraising.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, if you look at all the fundraising that's done by the party committees, 80% of it, 85% of it has his name somewhere in there. Or it's a plea to do something regarding him. So.
I think we have a question that came in from an online viewer, is that right?
Oh. Yes. Is somebody watching?
Now you're really scared, aren't
we
you?
didn't put him to sleep yet.
It's one of my kids. I guarantee it.
Oh, then he's going to tell me how much he likes me.
All
as
right,
opposed to better than
so the question is, what percent of the electorate are MAGA voters versus progressive voters versus like R and traditional D, is how the question reads.
Interesting.
you know,
It's whether you do leaners or not.
yeah. Well, first of all, to assume that every Republican is a MAGA voter is wrong. You can agree with Donald Trump's. One of the things we used to do when Trump was president was we used to ask the job approval in a 3-part instead of a 2-part. And the reason why we asked it in a 3-part is we used to ask, you like him personally, you approve of the job he's doing. You dislike him personally, but approve of the job he's doing.
Yeah.
You dislike him personally and the job he's doing. And we used to find that about 15 to 20% fit in that middle category of disliked him personally or his behavior, but liked the job he was doing as president. And so there's a group of Republicans who support what he did, but wouldn't necessarily call themselves MAGA. But if I had to guess, looking at the party, I would say that about 40%, maybe a little bit more, would literally run off of a cliff for him if they wanted to. And by the way, that's enough to control the party in the primaries.
Some people would call that demagoguery. But
Some people would.
here's the other thing I think is
Some people
important.
would call it popularity.
Yeah. Here's the other thing I think
Does
is
Biden have 40% that would run off a cliff?
Yes. Yeah. Starting with Anzalone, right here. But here's what I think is also important from your question. And again, Tony, it would be better to answer this. There's a big difference between Republicans who vote in a Republican primary
Absolutely.
versus people who just self-identify as Republicans. Because Republican primaries and Democratic primaries are really exclusive clubs.
Yeah.
It is a small universe of the total general election universe. But that is, the penalty for not participating.
But the second half of the question was progressives versus more traditional Democrats.
Well, here's the problem with progressive. Like, I consider myself a moderate, but I also consider myself a progressive. And one of the things that ticks me off is I feel that the ultra-liberals have kind of shanghaied the word progressive, because I think that you can be progressive. I'm pro-choice, pro-LGBTQ, et cetera, but I might be more moderate on this, or this, but I still consider myself progressive. So when we ask this question, do you consider yourself progressive or not progressive, we get this huge number who say yes. But when you do liberal, moderate, and conservative. But again, the myth in the Democratic Party is that the Democratic Party is super liberal, when in fact, half of the Democratic Party considers themselves moderate or conservative, and about half considers themselves liberal.
By the way, by contrast, 75% of the Republican
Consider
Party define themselves as conservative, of which almost half will say very conservative.
Right.
and in our professional lifetimes together, that's a huge change.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this. I mean, Bob Dole, we talked about Bob Dole. I mean, in 1976, most people don't remember or know this, Bob Dole was literally the hand-picked candidate of the Reagan forces to balance out Jerry Ford's ticket. Fast forward, 1988, Bob Dole's running for, he even ran, 1980 he ran for president and got torched by Ronald Reagan. 1988, he's to the left of George H.W. Bush. And then he comes back in 96 and runs in a crowded field where there's people that were more conservative than him, but some that weren't. The party has just evolved so much and changed.
Yeah, exactly. Is there another online question? Oh, okay, sorry. So who else has got a question? Right there, and then you get the last one up here, I guess. Okay.
Is there much lying to pollsters? And if there is, does it have a significant impact on polls?
Oh, lying, is it? Well, I think that scientifically or statistically, they balance each other out. Really, you have to just believe in the science and the statistics of it all. So it would be silly for me to say no, that they don't like. You remember Rush Limbaugh, he always encouraged people to lie. So yes, I think that there is lying, but there's also lying that's actually kind of a little bit more pure. We call it social desirability. In fact, we talked about it with the students, right? That you're actually answering how you think
people want to be.
Right. And so the answer is yes, but again, in the science of it, it all balances itself out.
But we have ways. We have ways. And one of the ways we have is we'll ask somebody, how are you going to vote? And then we'll say a few questions later, well, how do you think your friends and neighbors are going to vote? Right. And so if there's a difference, you'll see and you'll try to determine, well, why is there a difference? Why do you think their neighbors are voting that way and they're saying something different?
Yeah, funny how no one will admit to a racist, but they'll say that their neighbors are racist.
Right.
I mean,
absolutely.
right? You know, and it happens.
Absolutely.
You know, so
Absolutely.
All right, last question up here. Heidi.
Hi, there is a lot of demographic information that has really nothing to do with political party, and yet it seems more and more that's being used to describe political ideology, right? I could tell you that I like sushi, drive a Prius, and live in Lawrence, and you could probably guess my party. So my question is this: why did that happen? How has that occurred in American politics? And where do we see the ideological divide mix with this kind of ethereal cultural divide?
Well, I mean, you bring up, again, you have to, it goes to sequencing of questions. If you put things up top, male, female, and binary, like you give that option, all of a sudden it's a trigger that it's a Democratic poll. I mean, right? I mean, there's these weird things out there that you have to be careful about. And so, you know, the fact is that we just went through a series in 2020 and 2021 where, you know, if you wore a mask, if you were inoculated, et cetera, there were these, you know, okay, you're a Democrat. And so you can't, culturally, you can't get away from cultural tags.
You know, the old expression, you know, stereotypes are stereotypes because they're largely true. John or I could probably come up with 5 questions and ask each of you, and 95% of the time, guess what you are politically.
Right.
Because it's just birds of a feather flock together, fish swim in schools.
So is this really a sign the country has kind of divided itself along cultural lines?
Well, but it can even be, I mean, for example, I mean, parties perpetuate it too. In Georgia, if you were for, you know, solar tax credits in a Republican primary, you were, you know, you're not, you know, you weren't there. And there was, you know, there was legislation and stuff like that. It's good for the state. It was good for the economy, et cetera. So even things that should be good can be turned into a bad. And that's just kind of where we are now.
Well, and your point is all of that data. Actually, what happened is, and both parties do this, is we were talking about a little bit the analytics and stuff like that, is, you know, we decided that we were going to employ the same techniques that the big marketing firms use for corporate America to help do what they do, because what we wanted to do was we wanted to find more voters that might be part of our coalition. And the best way to do that was, again, try to find the birds of a feather that flock together.
And listen, this happens in business. There's a great company called Civic Science, and they ask all these fantastic questions that pollsters would never, like political pollsters. And you know, I got it, and it says the 5 things you need to know about pumpkin spice latte drinkers. And I sent it to my oldest daughter because that's what she drinks. And guess what? They've done all these correlations on what that is, and that's probably pretty good for Starbucks. And it's just a different type of tag. Yeah.
But you know, the one thing I say, the difference between what we do and what they do, and I tell this to clients all the time when they want to hire the local corporate ad agency or the local corporate strategist, whatever, I say, you know, think about it. Your friend, it's like Sears. If Sears, and now I'm dating myself.
Don't say Sears, man.
Target. If Target wants to have a white sale, they have a white sale. If it doesn't work, Target has another white sale. With us, we got 1 day every year to prove ourselves. The white sale doesn't work, we can't have another one the next weekend. We're out. So we're constantly in our business of having to prove ourselves and making right decisions for our clients.
And getting it right.
Yeah, and getting it right.
Well, thank you guys for sharing, getting it right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We'll be back here next Wednesday, same time, same place, with two less exalted pollsters, Joel Benenson
Great guys,
and
though.
Neil Newhouse. But we're going
Great
to talk.
guys.
They are. We're going to. I imposed on all my friends. We're going to talk specifically about political polarization in the country, where it came from, why it's so entrenched, and how it affects things
Newhouse
this
and
year.
Benenson started it all.
Yeah, 'cause that's what I'm going to say. So anyway, thank you all again. Thank you guys. Appreciate it very much.